Well, okay, that was Final Fantasy, the original one from 1987, remastered for like the 10 to the power of 9th time. Oh yeah, so we experienced a pixel remastered version of this. It's funny, like, while I've been playing this game off stream, I've been looking up little clips of what it looked like originally on the NES, right? And it really is very impressive, right? What they've managed to do over time with this game, because this isn't like the very first remaster. And it's really cool to me how this game is kind of testament to the fact that the aesthetics of a game really influence how much you enjoy its gameplay, right? Because the gameplay, I want to say, is like identical. I was watching a bit of gameplay of the original the other day on YouTube, and conceptually the game is one-to-one the same as this one. The combat is pretty much the same, the menuing is the same, the items are the same for the most part from what I could gather. And really what this brings to the table are like a lot of overhauls for like quality of life stuff, and you know, trying to make the game look as visually impressive as possible for like a 2D pixelated, you know, soft art style game. And it does all of that brilliantly. I thought this was such a beautiful way to kind of experience the original tale, right? The very first tale that spawned the franchise that we know and love, and what is arguably like one of the greatest game franchises of all time. And like I've kind of been saying over the course of this playthrough, I am just really glad that I decided to embark on this saga on my channel, where I kind of like play through all of these games, because like I said, I owe it to myself as someone who really does truly treasure and love this series. It's just it's been way too long, right? I've slept on these games for way too long. And I'm glad that we're going into this and getting the opportunity to see where quite a few of the elements that I know and love, and a lot of the staple elements I know and love from the series, where they came from, right? And how they were kind of spawned and their origin with this first game. And really, more than anything, it was fun to see the humble beginnings of the franchise, right? The truly, truly humble beginnings of the series. And again, knowing that this was their like last-ditch effort at making something that they could pour their hearts and souls into in an effort to like turn the company around is really heartwarming and also very inspirational. And playing this game with that in knowledge, it hits hard. And yeah, I think the biggest thing for me about this game is that it wasn't like a game that I thought was going to be very dated in a lot of ways. Like going into this, I thought my overall kind of thoughts on the game would be, hey, you know what? It was kind of cool to experience the humble beginnings of this series. And yeah, you know, I didn't enjoy a lot of it, predictably, because it's just very dated and a lot of old school elements that haven't aged well. But weirdly, right? I think that this game is timeless, right? I think you can play this at any point in time during the timeline of human existence and enjoy it, because at the end of the day, it's just fun, right? The year it came out has no bearing on how fun the game is to play. It is through and through just a fun game. It's got like that kind of addicting turn-based combat gameplay. I like the pace of the fights. They go by really fast. I feel like the fast forward feature was definitely like a little quality of life thing they added in during the fights, right? To like speed things up. But even without that, I like the pace of the combat, right? I like how fast the turn-based fights go. I kind of like the gameplay loop personally of how you're going through dungeons for the most part in this game. You know, scavenging treasure chests, getting cool gear, and then going on to the next dungeon and the next thing, and, you know, kind of exploring the world and trying to like piece the clues together as to where you got to go next. You know, and admittedly, I did have to look up at parts where I had to go during this playthrough because I got stuck, and, you know, that, like I said before during this playthrough, has to be the reason why I never actually finished a lot of these games growing up, because I have played a lot of these games here and there, right? It's not like I haven't played these at all. I have, but I just haven't finished them. I've played them to like varying degrees. Some I haven't played at all. So this is the thing that debatably, you know, hasn't aged well, if you want to like point those kind of things out in a game that I otherwise think has aged fairly well, is the fact that a lot of these old school games have this element where, in order to like prolong the game's length and how long the player will be experiencing it for, they make things as deliberately cryptic and challenging to find and locate in order to progress the story, right? You kind of have to like spend a lot of time roaming around the overworld, running into like combat scenarios, and talking to like every little NPC you can find for like the smallest of clues. They'll never actually be direct with you about where to go or what to do. And then after all of that, kind of like aggregating everything you found in order to make a decision about, okay, I'm going to go there next and see if that's what we have to do, or go there next and see what we have to do there. And that's the element that to me didn't age the best, but I get why it was like that at the time, where games couldn't be, you know, physically expansive due to like the hardware limitations of the time. And in order to like add the illusion of the game being longer, they just made things harder to access and harder to find, so the player would be forced to kind of stay in this world for as long as possible and get this sense of like they're adventuring to locate things and progress through things, which I found to be really interesting. It was cool to like experience that approach to game design in this that's very old school, you know, in 2023. Ultimately, this is a game where I kind of thought to myself, like, shit, you know, this isn't a game that I don't think has aged well. This isn't a game where I went in and thought it was going to be like, hey, you know what? This is an old game. As a result, didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. But rather, I came out of this experience going, this is just like any other Final Fantasy with its own unique identity, right? Which to me has been the beauty of the series overall, right? The beauty of Final Fantasy to me has always been that you can play any game you want, any game that stands out, pick any game in any order, like out of order, experience it and go, okay, maybe that one clicked with me, maybe this one didn't click with me. But it's a game with its own identity that isn't really objectively better or worse than the other games. You know what I mean? Like, this is probably going to sound like a really bold sort of hot take, but I don't think that, like, I can't sit here and say this is objectively worse, right, than the Final Fantasy games that came down the line. And I don't think that's going to be my perspective. I hope it's not towards any of the other games that we play through down the line, right? I think my conclusion towards pretty much all these games, once I'm done playing them, will be, this is a game with its own identity, and whether or not you enjoy it is going to be subjective. You can't really say it's objectively better or worse than the other games in the series. It's just kind of its own thing. And that's what I love about FF, and that's really what I got out of this game. I just think it's yet another Final Fantasy, which you'll either really love or hate depending on your taste. And I actually really liked it, man. I liked, like I said, the loop, going through the dungeons, getting chests, fighting bosses, teleporting out, going to the next thing, doing the next thing, so on and so forth. Yeah, overall it was great. Humble beginnings, of course, right? I can't really say things like, oh, I wish the characters had more development and stuff, because you do have to kind of acknowledge the context around this game, right? When it came out, the fact that it's the first game in the series, that they had like a limited, you know, kind of scope with this one. But I liked it. I liked the condensed sort of world they created here. It was really cute. It was like an amalgamation of all the D&D, Tolkien, you know, styled fantasy tropes, and I'm assuming they largely permeate the first 6 games, and 7, if not 6, even though it was in the same realm of 2D games, was the first to kind of break away from that, right? And so yeah, I thought this was great overall. A simple little plot about saving the world, saving the crystals, right? There's no other better way to really start a series like this, especially if it's something that spawned in the late 80s, you know? And it's truly amazing to see the start of it all. And again, really my only 2 little things as a result of like, of playing it now that I think, even though the majority of like, in the grand scheme of things, this game has aged pretty well, the only 2 things that I would say are critiques of mine, regardless of like, you know, what this game came out, what the context was around it, like that are kind of like timeless critiques to have, if you will, are things like the fact that you have to like fight bosses again a second time, like the same bosses you fought before, like towards the end, you have to fight them again. And they almost seem to be exactly the same. They weren't like harder or easier or anything. But what was my other complaint again about this? Yeah, the fact that the game is kind of like padded out in a way, and this is like something to do generally with old games, they're padded in a way where the game doesn't tell you explicitly where to go next or what to do next, and you have to like figure out what to do, which to an extent is fine, but this game goes a little overboard with it, and I can anticipate the next couple of games doing the same thing, which again, I get they're a product of their time, but it's something I can still complain about. I feel like I have the right to kind of, you know, have a little quip with there. But overall, ultimately, if there's one thing I want to say that is a takeaway from all of this, is that Final Fantasy 1, despite its humble beginnings, is still a timeless game that stands out as its, just like any other Final Fantasy title, as its own unique entry into the series with its own unique coat of paint. There are a couple other things I maybe wanted to talk about here. Yeah, the stuff with this remaster, right? The little elements it brings to the table. I'm not familiar with all of them, like I said. I did YouTube a bit of the original game. But little things that remasters do that really kind of stand out as green flags to me, if you will, that the developers really put in time and care and effort into kind of making this remaster stand out as something where they, you know, it's a project where they really cared about it, right? Like a passion project. Things like being able to swap between original music and the remastered track and just see that the quality of the arrangements, right? How much soul they put into the music here to make it as grand and as epic and as beautiful as it was, right? And then to also be able to kind of see when I was like not really playing through the game and YouTubing stuff, how much this game evolved, not just since the original NES version, but also its other remasters, right? It becomes so clear that this isn't really a soulless sort of cash grab of a remaster. It's like a straight up remake, right? Like I went in this thinking that, okay, it won't be too different from the GBA versions, but I saw a lot of that stuff and I saw a lot of the NES stuff and the evolution of it, and I was so pleasantly surprised, man. And this just makes me more excited to play the other 5 titles in this old school era down the line, right? Particularly 6, because 6 is considered to be like the most beloved of this era of Final Fantasy games. If not like one of the best in general out of like every single one that has ever been released. So yeah, that was Final Fantasy 1. I'm really happy with how this game turned out, and I'm glad. I'm just really glad at the end of the day that we got to experience the genesis of one of my favorite game series ever. So yeah, I'm excited now to hop into part 2.